Womanjeka, let's transform eco-anxiety to action. Series 3 of the 2 Bays podcast is a collaboration between Regeneration Projects, UN Youth Australia and RMIT University. We acknowledge the 2 Great Bays, Port Phillip and Western Port, which are known to Melbourne's First Peoples as Nerm and Warmarin or Murrumbik. So we show deep respect to First Nations elders across Australia, past and present, who for over 60,000 years have cared for country with rich ecological knowledge. Their leadership reminds us of our own responsibility as a B Corp and actor in the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Schools, universities, Tafes and other education institutions have found themselves at the front line of youth mental health. We're still navigating the legacy of COVID-19, so let's go behind the scenes. Principal at Salesian College Chadstone, and his school has become an early adopter of Regeneration Projects' ecological literacy, leadership and entrepreneurship programs. Dr. Jana Menssink is the project coordinator in youth mental health at University of Melbourne's Centre for Youth Mental Health, working closely with Orygen on research and evidence-based practice to develop innovative training programs and resources. She works part-time as a psychologist in research and in clinical settings. In a nutshell, youth mental health issues, including climate anxiety, are showing up in Australian education. But industry experts and researchers are building capacity across the sector. A combination of strong leadership and values are showing signs of positive transformation. Womanjeka, Mark, welcome to the 2 Bays podcast. Thanks so much for being here. How did your career path take you to becoming a principal?
Well, thank you, Matt, and for your warm welcome and the opportunity to share my story about becoming a principal and becoming a leader in this space. I've been fortunate enough to work with young people in Catholic education now for over 25 years, and I've been really blessed to have that opportunity provided to me around formation and learning opportunities that has allowed me to develop my leadership. I've always loved the outdoors. I've loved sport and connecting with people. And so when I began my teaching in physical education, outdoor education, religious education and science, teaching in the classroom, it was one that taught me values, it taught me communication skills and the importance of faith and contemplation. And it was, I guess, in the outdoor education program early in my career that I really got a love of the environment. I spent 99 evenings in my first year of teaching under canvas in a tent.
That's a pretty good average.
And 95 in my second year. I'm not sure too many educators would have began their career in that way, but what it gave me was the opportunity for my classroom to be in some pretty special environments working with young people. So I got a great love of the outdoors through bushwalking, rock climbing, kayaking, skiing and surfing, and allowed me to build some really positive relationships with young people and understand what their goals and aspirations were in that space. So as an educator, I've always had that experience in mind in linking learning experiences to the outdoors and applied experiences. So that's been a great learning for me and building the skills of my students. And then from there, working in various leadership roles, I went from being in the classroom to leading student wellbeing programs, which focused on transition and belonging, mental health for young people, and proactive programs around countering some societal issues that were taking place. And then I moved into faith formation and then from there into learning and teaching before stepping into this role as principal.
Well, there's quite a journey there, and absolutely love that connection to the outdoors that seems to be, critical in your teaching. Jana, as we come across to you up in Gadigal country, in Sydney, or Warang, as it might be known by the First Peoples there, really curious to get to know you a little bit better. So for our listeners, what's something that you're currently working on at Orygen or at the bridge between Orygen and University of Melbourne?
Yeah, so we do a lot of collaborations between Orygen and the University of Melbourne, and we have a few exciting projects that we're hoping to get funding for. One of the key things that we're hoping to look at is how to really accelerate research in the space between climate change and youth mental health. It's something that, even though we know climate change and climate distress is such a priority for young people, research is lacking, and we know that there's a real lag time between research being translated into clinical settings or different programs. So we're keen to look at some innovative trial platforms, technologies, and different infrastructure to really look at making a change now.
Yeah, brilliant. And perhaps as you share that, it feels pertinent to be able to just give listeners a bit of an orientation on where we're at in this series. So we're in episode 4. In the first episode, we had Vasil from UN Youth Australia joining us and setting the scene as we set off on this Transforming Eco-Anxiety to Action series. Then we had Joey and also Charlotte from School Strike for Climate talking about, some of their advocacy, some of their striking. And from there, we moved into, looking at some of the emerging research coming out of Curtin University, some things that have come out of the Young Tourism Network, UN Youth Australia's own reports. And then we started to shift about, okay, what are the solutions out there that are ready for scaling? And so we created this bridge across the ditch between colleagues in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and here in Australia, and starting to think about, how we can work on what is a whole of planet issue, but starting, in our broader region. So as we step into this conversation, I think there's this, as you say, there's this lack of evidence, but this clarity of need and also some urgency. But it seems to be that building the capacity of the education sector is absolutely vital for us to be able to move forward. Mark, in our first conversation, we sat down in your office and you talked about fostering environmental stewardship, nurturing responsible global citizens, and teaching students to leave the world in a better place than you find it. Can you describe how this aligns with the Salesian and the Don Bosco philosophy?
So the founder of the Salesians, Don Bosco, he had the focus of developing good Christians and honest citizens. And as a Catholic school, we're guided and challenged by Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which is a wonderful document that means caring for the earth. The letter is addressed to every person living on the planet, and it's a wonderful guiding letter, and it calls for global dialogue about how we shape the future of our planet through our daily actions and decisions. So as a school, our hope is that the students leave our college with the values, with the skills and knowledge to equip them to be able to contribute to society through compassion, through dialogue and through action.
I'm curious, as that is such a strong anchor in the school, how do you see that playing out in amongst the other array of priorities and things that you must be juggling, and also maybe challenges that you might be facing in learning environments as well?
Great question, Matt. For us, it's around that ecological education piece and also ecological spirituality. So I think our faith community lends really well to reaching out to those who are impacted by environmental challenges. The dignity of all, the cry of the poor, how we advocate, how we raise awareness and fundraise for particular organisations, how our community, both our staff as well as our students, move into those spaces and become a voice for those who don't necessarily have a voice, where the impact of environment and climate change is taking its toll. So we're really conscious of that education piece, working through the Sustainable Development Goals as well as the Laudato Si principles to ensure that our boys do have an understanding and do have a willingness to help those in need.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to hear you map that out, and just the grounding in faith, and then also the secular values and goals and the sustainable development goals here. And I think it's interesting because if we think about the education system, often there is a strong grounding in faith, and it's quite amazing and also inspiring to see, you know, a leader in Pope Francis in being able to put out this document as a call to action, and also tools and platforms around that. But I guess what I'd love to dive in a little bit later is how we create that bridge between the local backyard action and some of those global and whole of world agendas. Jana, if I come to you, we've got, you know, this education system with these different kinds of institutions and these growing, needs and calls, and the school strike for climate, and research that's coming out on youth mental health. And I guess this transition post-COVID as we try and navigate it. I'm super curious, do you think you'd be able to walk us through the current policy landscape in this place, and also give us some hints on where you think this needs to go next, including how research is enabling this transition to happen?
Yeah. So in terms of the policy landscape, for listeners who are interested, Orygen has last year released a policy report called the Climate of Distress Report, which you can find on the website of Orygen, which is ORYGEN. And one of the key policy outcomes that we've raised in that report is that we need to ensure that young people's perspectives and voices are central to the development and implementation of any policies in this area. We know young people are a priority population in the context of climate change, and they have the right to be actively involved in decision making that happens not only on a local level but also on a global level. And we know that there's a few different ways we can do that, whether that's establishing youth advisory groups, ensuring young people are involved with the co-design of any programs that are developed. And that's something that we know from our research is going to be really important for also helping young people's climate distress, because we found in the research that we have done that one of the biggest factors impacting young people's mental health was that lack of climate action that is being taken by the government. And so really seeing the government take strong climate action is going to be one of the most helpful solutions for young people's climate distress. And that is something that the government can implement in, any of their policy reports, whether it's the annual climate change statement in Australia, ensuring that young people are involved in these reports, but also ensuring the reports include information about the impacts of climate change on young people and their health, whether that's direct impacts such as exposure to extreme weather events, such as heat waves, flooding, bushfires, which have affected a lot of young people in Australia. And also those indirect impacts of climate change, which I'm sure your audience group is probably quite aware of. So those things about feeling worried about the future, feeling that sense of hopelessness, anger can be a big one, and frustration. And we also know that when we do involve young people in that advocacy work, that we need to make sure that we are supporting them well. So some of our research has shown that some of the groups who are at greatest risk of climate distress are women, gender diverse people, people who are directly impacted by those climate-related weather events, but also people involved in climate advocacy. So, it's really important that that is at the forefront. Do you want me to keep talking about some of the policy recommendations? I know that was a mouthful.
It's good. I'd love you to keep going deeper, because I think these intricacies are things that we don't even often get a chance to actually hear mapped out for us. And as you're talking, one of the things that comes up in my mind is the images that were look, to be honest, a bit confronting. Like, we've already talked about the 2019 climate strikes, and that was a massive catalyst for us as a business, but also many others in our community in Melbourne, across Australia, internationally. But I guess one of the scenes that we saw soon after that were the Black Summer bushfires. And so I'm curious, as my mind goes to images that friends were sending, for example, out of East Gippsland, Gunai country, and the smoke that was experienced, really across the East Coast. I've had that experience. I've heard, young people talk about this experience, but I'm wondering how the research that you've done and some of the policy aspects relate to things like that, and how can we better respond and support young people? Because unfortunately, we are experiencing a time where we know we will experience it again, and on average we will be experiencing it more. So yeah, can you shed a little bit more light for us?
Absolutely. And like you said, that kind of knowing it will be experienced again is one of the complexities in this space. So psychiatry in the natural disaster space and first responses, community responses, those things have had a lot of research, a lot of work put into them. But what is quite unique about these climate-related extreme weather events is that certain geographical locations are vulnerable to being repeatedly impacted. And so it's really this kind of repeated destruction of people's homes, schools, communities, physical health impacts, and that kind of uncertainty that young people especially are having to deal with, never mind impacts on their education, ability to participate in sports, their social networks. So we know that there's actually a lot of work we need to do in this space, and that while, Australia, we can be quite well equipped with how we respond to some of these disasters in terms of on-the-ground support, rebuilding, in terms of the mental health impacts and what repeated exposures, what that does for young people, there's a really gap in our knowledge, and something we need to be working on. With that, we are trying to advocate, like yourselves, for more work in this space. And it's really important that we go into doing that work with taking on board the knowledge we already have. And it's really important that when we do respond to climate distress, that we shouldn't try to reduce young people's climate concern. It is a real threat, and it's really important not to invalidate or minimise those concerns, and instead to ensure we have that nuance where we help target young people who are experiencing that real, negative impacts. And I think a recent survey showed that 20% of people who do feel that climate, concern about climate change, are actually experiencing impacts to their functioning. So their sleep being affected, their concentration being affected. And so we need to find better ways to be able to support those people who are being impacted by this, like you said, not just once, with these events, but repeatedly.
I guess is a tricky one, and what we've heard, that almost talking down or suppressing those feelings of young people is something we've heard repeatedly through this. But then in contrast, what happens when we create safe spaces for that sharing to occur, and then also the empowerment for action then to be taken. And Mark, I'm thinking of you, at Salesian, and a couple of initiatives that come to mind. You've got Liam there as the environmental captain, and you've also got the Green Alliance Club. Do you want to touch on just a couple of these ways that you're creating these safe spaces for people to gather, to share, but then also stepping stones to be able to, move forward and channel that energy into something positive?
So I think part of the work that we do in our education space is sort of try to tap into the heart and mind of young people. That was Don Bosco's work. So we're trying to provide our young people with initiatives that will allow them to emotionally become invested in in this space. So we've introduced key staff roles, a global citizenship leader, a student empowerment leader. We've increased our psychologists in the school to, as we know, there are challenges with mental health and particularly around that eco-anxiety. What we've established through these particular staff roles is student leadership roles. So our environmental captain, Liam Matteo, is a wonderful young man who is very passionate about this area of school life, and in the broader community he's leading a group of very passionate students to bring about change. They want to make a difference, and we're trying to allow that to happen by empowering them to be involved in key projects and initiatives, whether it be through local council, with composting programs, sustainability projects and awareness pieces there. We've also engaged Resource Smart Schools program, which the boys are leading with those key staff member roles, and obviously Regeneration Projects and the partnership we're establishing there, which is like my hope as the principal is that we are embedding this through curriculum as well as service in the community to regenerate not only our campus but the local community areas.
And I might jump in there and elaborate, because I think that last point there about these systems, you're creating scaffolding in the way that the organisation is structured, the staffing roles, the student roles. You're also incentivising and rewarding leadership that comes through sustainability and environmental leadership, which is key. And I guess when we started our conversation about how Regeneration Projects could allow that pathway, we've been doing a bit of desktop research, and one of the things that came out was this strong alignment to some of the faith-based values. There's reconciliation aspirations as well. There's master planning that's happening in the school, which will be its own transformation process. So you're kind of set up in this next wave. And what we'll be doing over the next little while, we'll be doing some focus sessions with students and also focus sessions with some of the staff there. And then a couple of workshops where we'll be allowing space for reflection around these feelings of eco-anxiety. Because your school is such a diverse school, the students... I've got an idea in my mind, which I won't give too much away, but essentially it's about celebrating their cultural diversity and connecting them to that wholeness of the planet and helping them see that they are the planet, literally. Because how many nationalities roughly are represented in your school?
We celebrate over 90 languages in our school community, and with that brings different beliefs and values, and we're fortunate enough to have that diversity that enriches our community.
And I think being able to harness that diversity is key, and that's why in that second session what we'll be really doing is trying to help introduce them to these ecological leadership principles and then connect that into things that they can be doing within the school environment. And I think this, if we're able to nurture this over time, and then later this year there's opportunity to be piloting our app that we're developing in this space. So I guess it's just an example of how a school here in Melbourne, but it could be any other place across Australia, is navigating this transition, and it's one of many stories that are emerging. But it's great that I think like what you were saying earlier, Jana, was that these things are then they're like little wattles, nitrogen fixers that then pave the way for other things to be able to grow beyond that. Jana, when we think about some of the, I guess this bridging between the research, the policy, the education sector, University of Melbourne is obviously a key institution, here in Australia and in Melbourne, and so many young people are using that as a pathway, and we've got some of those coming up later in the series. But I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you see that importance of the bridge between institutions like this, universities in this case, and government and other organisations as part of that almost triangulation of efforts, and young people as well being there and supported through this combination?
Very important. So I guess maybe by way of a bit more background or a bit more context, Orygen, the Centre for Youth Mental Health Research within the University of Melbourne, we have 4 key arms. So firstly, we do a lot of high impact, high quality research, and research translation is a really big focus of that. So ensuring we bridge that gap between knowledge that we gain through research and its application in clinical practice and in policy. So we also provide clinical services that are providing often really innovative clinical supports to young people and their families. We do a lot of advocacy work, whether that's working with other not-for-profits or engaging in government consultations, and also for the youth mental health sector more broadly. So I've mentioned, yes, the research, clinical services, advocacy, and our policy, so providing that independent advice. And when we talk about young people, we are talking about 12 to 25-year-olds. And so the reason that we focus on that age group is because we know that 75% of all mental illness will have an onset before the age of 25. So we know intervening early is going to set someone up for a more well lifespan, really. So we're not just working to promote young people's well-being, but we're working to promote the well-being of Australians and, the kind of global population more broadly. So in terms of some of the collaborations, we are well set up to be able to do that. And we have started developing some partnerships with community organisations like Museums Victoria, who've been really fantastic to have on board. So we co-facilitate and host climate cafes with them, and we're working at looking how we can expand some of those community service offerings and really provide safe spaces for young people to be able to share some of their concerns and really get that peer-to-peer support to be able to connect with like-minded people. We know from especially research I've been doing recently that a lot of young people can feel quite isolated with these concerns. And we also know that a lot of community organisations want to be doing more, a lot of schools want to be doing more, but because there is really a lack of guidelines around how do we support young people with empowering them with knowledge, but also having that duty of care to them and supporting their well-being and any distress or grief or frustration that may arise related to climate change. Having those partnerships is really essential for us to be able to support and make progress for young people in the space, but also really importantly having young people as a key party in these partnerships, so really actively involved because we want to be working with young people for young people to be able to make a change in this area.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're creating a unique space in this episode when we're not in an intergenerational conversation. Well, we are in an intergenerational conversation, but we're not dealing with and engaging with that particular youth group that you're talking about, which I think is a unique opportunity, and I'm going to lean into that. And I'm curious about this intersection that we've created. Mark, as an education leader and as someone that's actually supporting a team of educators, I'm curious, is there a question or something that maybe in the space that Jana's working in that in terms of tools and resources and things, is there something that you're curious about how maybe people inside your organisation or other peers at other school might be able to draw on some of the things what you're doing? What's a question that comes up for you?
I think for me as a leader is establishing those guidelines that will help us as educators work with young people, and I'm excited by what Jana said around that development in that space, working with various partners and hearing the voice of young people coming through that sort of documentation. So for me, it's around what are our next steps as secondary schools or even primary schools, which feed into our like schools. So that's probably the piece for me as well. What are the resources that we can use that guide our decision making, whether it be around professional learning for staff or curriculum pieces and or other programs that support young people to, I guess, be empowered to be developing that passion to have a voice in this area.
Yeah, no, I'm going to come to you. What's your first, intuitive response? You've had no time to prepare on this, but what would you put forward to Mark?
Yeah, so unfortunately, Mark, I can't hear you super well. The volume is pretty quiet for me. So I might just rephrase. I understood that you believe that working together to develop some guidelines would be useful.
So I think, is that right, that you're looking, I think Mark's saying that he's curious about guidelines and resources and tools that are being made available to education leaders to be able to support this next phase of work. Is that a rough translation?
That's the rough translation,
Yep.
but also how student voice is brought into creating those guidelines.
And perhaps processes and ways of working and in enabling that to come to life, let's say.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, it's great to hear that there's an interest in that, because that's actually one of the gaps that we've identified. That in terms of freely available, co-designed with young people resources, tools, guidelines, that's something that's really missing in this space. And we're keen to be able to, put together those resources, make them freely available, and develop some processes so that this work can be taken up by any schools that are interested. And we'd love to partner with interested schools. So, absolutely get in contact, Mark, about some of the opportunities for us to be able to really, put this work in and work on making freely available resources that can be tailored for local context. So that can be a really important part of developing these toolkits. So because we know that different communities of young people across Australia, across the globe, they will have unique needs. And it's really important having their voices and providing a platform for their voices and, enabling them to have input in the development of any guidelines or resources. So I think that's something that I would love to talk more about and to really hit the ground running on putting some of this work in. Yes, absolutely. So, Mark, I'm curious about how schools really support young people to be able to advocate and take action in this space. Because I know that climate distress can be associated with some pro-environmental behaviours, and we know sustainability, recycling, conservation can be important. But when I look at the research we've done with young people, they want more. And they want to be able to be a part of change that's happening on a broader scale. They want support from people who have louder voices to make sure those messages are heard by the key decision makers in this country. And I'm wondering whether schools are supporting young people to really take some of the stuff to the next step.
Well, firstly, thanks, Jana, for offering the opportunity to connect and partner with you and Orygen. I think that that's a wonderful opportunity that we can explore. In terms of what we are doing as a school community, we're providing opportunities for our young people to develop their leadership skills and public speaking skills so that they can be confident to have a voice in this area and with other societal issues that may present. We also have through our religious education program, our oratory program, are exposing our boys to social issues, and we do that through a safe way in which boys can come forward and share their concerns and worries, and then we structure it up so there is a strong network that they can tap into, either through key staff educators or psychologists in the school, which enables them to have a voice. We've got a number of different groups in the school community, both our Student Congress and our Salesian Green Alliance group, that allows our boys to put ideas forward and have a voice to advocate for others around climate action and change. So we are working in that space, which is exciting. So trying to find opportunities to honour student ideas and initiatives. Often they'll come to myself or our leadership team. We're in a position where we can say yes to students and really provide them with opportunities and support structures to allow them to follow those projects.
I'm so glad that we've been able to touch on some of those support structures that enable ideas to come into the world, because it's something we're going to be diving into in one of our upcoming episodes. And it seems to be that there's energy there, there's ideas there, there's the the voice and allowing that voice to grow through the support systems that you're talking about, Mark. Feels really important, and it also feels like there's this tipping point and there's this almost an acceleration that we're needing to I guess cross a threshold together. So it's exciting, it's probably a little bit daunting, and sometimes intergenerational dynamics can be tricky, as we've already heard through the series. But it sounds like we've got some strong foundations here coming out, talking about some of the research, talking about some of the policy advocacy. It sounds like there's work to do. It sounds like in some ways we're in early days. Jana, you're nodding your head, and I feel like probably your team is a growing one, just like some of those roles that are happening inside Salesian College and no doubt other schools. But folks, we are going to start to wrap up here. I guess what we wanted to do was to start to navigate this space of building capacity within the education sector, and to be honest, it feels like we're finding our way a little bit, and I think that's totally okay, because it's 5 years as we record this particular episode since the 2019 school strike for climate that happened here in Melbourne. 100,000 Melburnians of different generations took to the streets and really called for action. And I guess it's a moment of contemplation, of reflection, and really thinking about those principles that allow us to show up, whether it's in our workplaces or our learning places, our community spaces. The thing that I wanted to finish on for this particular episode was it's striking that when we think about decision makers, we often put a lot of emphasis on government leaders, and we then go to policy and different legislation and so on. But I think what we've heard in this conversation is also some of the faith and religious beliefs and principles that also guide our community in different ways, and they can be quite diverse in their approaches, but often quite similar in their foundational values. And the thing that maybe comes to mind is, I was at an event earlier this week, and it was an organisation that was referencing, actually here at RMIT, and they have a Bundle statement, which it involves a specific phrasing that uses First Nations Kulin language here, and it goes a little bit like this. So it's about RMIT making a dumbal, or a commitment, to abide by the principles of the First Peoples. And part of that is this dumbal, or this commitment, not to harm the Warneet, the waterways, not to harm the Bik-Biks, the lands, and not to harm the Bububs, or the children. And so we think about governing structures. We're really at this interesting point, I think, in Australian society, where we're asking deep questions about reconciliation and how we relate to country and land and nature, sky, environment, and so on. But we're also navigating how our policies have come out of, British European systems, and also faith systems that have come out of different parts of the world. And so we can only wonder, how we can harness that diversity to be able to move forward. But tools in people's hand and maybe embracing a little bit of Aussie DIY might go a long way to being able to move us forward. So, Mark, thank you so much for sharing some insights from your role as a principal at Salesian College Chadstone, and Jana from Gadigal Country, thank you so much for sharing your work as a bridge between Orygen and Uni Melb. Really curious to see how this space grows, but thank you for sharing your time and expertise. Nungujin. Cheers. This 2-bay series, Transforming Eco-Anxiety to Action, is part of Regeneration Projects' ongoing work in building young Australians' ecological literacy, leadership and entrepreneurship skills. If you're an educator, employer, decision maker or a young person passionate about positive change, go to our new website, 2bays.earth, to discover our new app, educational workshops and capacity building programs. Folks, that's a wrap. Thanks to our series partners, UN Youth Australia and RMIT University, special guests, researching, advocating and innovating solutions, and listeners. Remember, subscribe to 2Bays on your favourite podcast platform and Instagram. My name is Matt, and on behalf of Regeneration Projects, Nungojin. Thank you for tuning in, and see you on the next episode of the 2Bays podcast.